Have you ever stopped to think how a simple seamstress could become so irreplaceable that an entire city refused to let her go? Today, we're going to delve into the story of Dorcas in the Bible, a woman who never preached a sermon, never performed a miracle, never led a movement, and yet when she died, the apostles themselves came running. This is the story of Dorcas. Her name meant gazelle. She lived in the coastal city of Joppa. She spent her days doing something most people would consider ordinary, sewing clothes for widows. While others sought platforms and recognition, Dorcas worked quietly in the shadows with needle and thread. But here's what most people miss about her story. When Dorcas stopped breathing, something extraordinary happened. The entire community refused to accept it. They didn't just mourn, they acted. They sent urgent messengers to find the Apostle Peter. They gathered in an upstairs room with evidence of her work. They wept, not with the quiet resignation of inevitable loss, but with the desperate grief of people who knew they had lost someone irreplaceable. And there's something I'll reveal at the end of this video, something about what happened in that upstairs room that will completely change how you understand the value of quiet faithfulness, the power of unseen service, and what makes someone truly irreplaceable in God's eyes. So stay with me, because the story of the woman whose absence heaven itself could not ignore begins now. To understand Dorcas, we need to go back to the coastal city of Joppa in the 1st century, a port city, a community of new believers, and among them, a woman named Dorcas who spent her days doing something most people would consider ordinary, sewing clothes for widows who had nothing. In that culture, a woman without a husband had no security, no income, no protection. Many widows begged, some starved. Most lived in desperate poverty that ground them down day by day. And Dorcas saw this need and responded with her hands. Day after day, she sat with needle and thread. Her fingers moved with practiced skill, creating tunics and cloaks from simple fabric. She didn't sew for profit. She didn't sew for recognition. She sewed because she saw need. She was a disciple, the Bible tells us, a follower of Jesus in a city where Christianity was still new and sometimes dangerous. But Dorcas didn't preach in the synagogues. She didn't perform signs and wonders in the streets. Her ministry was quieter, more intimate. She loved God by loving the people everyone else overlooked. Have you ever felt invisible in your service? Have you ever wondered if the quiet things you do actually matter? Dorcas lived that question every single day. She worked in obscurity while others sought stages. She sewed in silence while others spoke to crowds. But there's something about faithful service that heaven never ignores, and Dorcas was about to prove that. Then one ordinary morning, something changed. Dorcas became ill. At first, perhaps it seemed like nothing serious. A fever, weakness, the kind of sickness that passes with rest. But this sickness didn't pass. It deepened. Her breathing became labored. Her strength faded, and despite the care of those who loved her, Dorcas died. The Bible records it with heartbreaking simplicity. She became sick and died. Acts chapter 9, verse 37. No dramatic final words, no miraculous healing, just death, sudden and final and devastating. What would you do if someone you depended on was suddenly gone? The widows of Joppa faced that reality. The woman who had clothed them was now wrapped in burial cloths herself. They washed her body according to Jewish custom. They placed her in an upper room, and then, instead of proceeding immediately with burial, as was typical in that hot climate, they did something unusual. They sent for Peter. The apostle was in Lydda, a town about 18 kilometers away. 2 men ran the entire distance with an urgent message. Come at once. Don't delay. Why didn't they just bury her and grieve like everyone else? What made them believe that Peter's presence would make a difference? The Bible doesn't tell us their exact reasoning, but their actions spoke louder than words. They refused to accept that this was the end. They refused to believe that someone so vital could simply be gone. They acted on desperate hope. Before we continue, if this story is stirring something inside you, if you're beginning to see that quiet faithfulness matters more than you realized, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next will reveal something powerful about how heaven values the servants no one notices. And you'll want more stories like this, stories of forgotten biblical characters, quiet obedience, and divine recognition. Peter came immediately. He didn't send a message of condolence. He didn't wait until it was convenient. He dropped everything and traveled 18 kilometers to a city where a woman he may never have met lay dead in an upper room. When Peter arrived in Joppa, he was taken directly to the house, and what he encountered there was unlike any mourning scene he had witnessed before. The upper room was filled with widows, all of them weeping, all of them holding something in their hands, tunics, cloaks, simple garments sewn with careful stitches. Acts chapter 9 verse 39 records what happened. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Picture that moment. The widows weren't showing Peter their own faith, they were showing him hers. Each stitch represented an hour of Dorcas's life given away. Each seam spoke of patience and care. Each finished garment declared that someone had seen them, had valued them, had loved them enough to meet their need. Can you imagine what Peter felt in that moment? He had walked with Jesus. He had seen the Lord heal the sick and raise the dead. He had witnessed Jairus' daughter rise from her deathbed. And now, he stood in a room full of evidence that this woman, this quiet seamstress, had lived a life worthy of divine attention. The widows weren't demanding a miracle, but their very presence was a prayer. Their tears were intercession. Their grief testified that some absences leave holes nothing else can fill. Peter looked at the body of Dorcas lying on the bed. He looked at the widows clutching their garments. He looked at the simple room that had become a sanctuary of sorrow. And then he made a decision that would echo through 2,000 years of church history. He sent them all out of the room. Acts chapter 9 verse 40 tells us what happened next. Peter sent them all out of the room, then got down on his knees and prayed. He knelt beside the bed where Dorcas lay. The room was silent now. Peter closed his eyes. He had no script for this, no formula, just a desperate prayer rising from a heart that understood one profound truth. This woman's work was not finished. How long did Peter pray? The Bible doesn't say, minutes, hours, but when he finally opened his eyes and turned toward the body, he spoke just 2 words. Tabitha, get up. The Aramaic name, the intimate name. Not a command shouted across a distance, but a gentle call, as if waking a friend from sleep. And then something happened that only God could orchestrate. She opened her eyes. Dorcas, who had been dead, looked at Peter with the confusion of someone waking from deep sleep. She sat up. Life returned to limbs that had been cold and still. Breath filled lungs that had stopped breathing. Her heart, which had ceased its rhythm, began beating again. Death had been reversed. Peter helped her to her feet. Then he called the believers and the widows back into the room, and when they saw her standing there, alive, breathing, looking at them with eyes that had been closed forever, what happened next was beyond words. Acts chapter 9, verse 42 records the aftermath. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. The resurrection of Dorcas wasn't just a miracle, it was a message, a declaration from heaven that this life, this quiet life of service, this ordinary ministry of needle and thread, mattered so profoundly that God Himself intervened to continue it. Think about what this means. In the entire New Testament, only 3 people were raised from the dead by the apostles. A young man named Eutychus, who fell from a window. A man named Tabitha in Lydda. And Dorcas. She was the only woman. the only one whose resurrection was prompted by community grief, the only one whose work was displayed as evidence before the miracle occurred. God could have chosen to raise anyone. He chose to raise the seamstress. He chose to restore the woman whose hands had clothed the vulnerable. Why? Because in God's economy, faithfulness in small things is never small. What happened in that upper room in Joppa wasn't just about Dorcas. It was about every person who has ever wondered if their quiet service matters. Every person who has sown in secret, served without recognition, loved without applause. Heaven was answering a question that echoes through every generation. Does God notice the things no one else sees? The answer came in the form of a woman sitting up from her deathbed. Yes, He notices, He values. And sometimes, when the work is not yet finished, He intervenes in ways that defy every natural law to make sure it continues. Dorcas went back to her sewing, back to her widows, back to her quiet life, but nothing was the same. Because now everyone knew her life had been so valuable to God that death itself could not keep her. Dorcas wasn't just a woman who sewed clothes. She was a living picture of something profound about how God works in the world. Just as Dorcas clothed the naked and cared for the vulnerable, Jesus came to clothe us in righteousness and care for our deepest needs. Just as Dorcas's work was done in obscurity but valued by heaven, our service to Christ often goes unnoticed by the world but is recorded in eternity. Just as the widows gathered around Peter showing evidence of Dorcas's love, one day we will stand before Christ and the evidence of our lives will be displayed. Not our accomplishments or our fame, but our faithfulness. The Apostle Paul understood this. In the letter to the Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, he writes, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." Dorcas embodied this truth. She didn't sow for applause. She sowed as unto the Lord. And God honored that faithfulness in a way that transcended death itself. Here's what most people miss about this story. God didn't raise Dorcas because she was perfect. He raised her because her work wasn't finished. There were still widows who needed clothes. There was still love to be given. There was still a purpose to fulfill. And this tells us something crucial about how God sees our lives. He's not impressed by what the world calls great. He's moved by what He calls faithful. He doesn't measure impact by platforms or numbers. He measures it by obedience in the small moments when no one is watching. Dorcas never knew she would be in the Bible. She never imagined her story would be told for 2,000 years. She just sewed, day after day, stitch after stitch, widow after widow, and heaven counted every single one. God could have showcased kings and prophets exclusively. He could have filled the New Testament only with dramatic conversions and powerful sermons. But He chose to include Dorcas, the seamstress, the woman whose ministry was so quiet it could have been overlooked entirely, except heaven doesn't overlook faithfulness, ever. So what do we learn from Dorcas? First, your quiet service matters more than you think. Dorcas never preached, she sewed, and her sewing was so valuable to God that He brought her back from death to continue it. If you're serving in ways no one notices, folding laundry, preparing meals, listening to the lonely, caring for the sick, know this: heaven sees, heaven values, heaven records. Second, faithfulness in obscurity is never wasted. The widows of Joppa didn't forget what Dorcas had done. They carried physical evidence of her love. In the same way, every act of service you perform leaves a mark, maybe not on history books, but on hearts. And hearts matter more than headlines. You don't have to be famous to be faithful. You don't have to be recognized to be righteous. You just need to do what God has placed in front of you with wholehearted devotion. Finally, God values you for who you are, not just what you do. Dorcas was brought back not because of her accomplishments, but because of her heart. The widows didn't show Peter a resume. They showed him garments sewn with love. God sees your heart. He knows your motives, and when your service flows from genuine love for Him and others, it carries weight in eternity that you cannot measure on earth. So the question isn't, am I doing something big enough to matter? The question is, am I being faithful with what God has given me right now? Dorcas was faithful with needle and thread, and God transformed that faithfulness into a testimony that has inspired millions. What has God placed in your hands? Maybe it's not sewing. Maybe it's teaching children, visiting the sick, writing encouragement, serving meals, or simply being present for people who are lonely. Whatever it is, do it with all your heart, because you never know when heaven is paying attention. Actually, that's wrong. Heaven is always paying attention. You never know when heaven will publicly honor what you've been doing in private. Dorcas teaches us that some of the most important work in God's kingdom happens in rooms no one else enters, in conversations no one else hears, in moments of service no one else applauds. But God is in those rooms. God hears those conversations. God applauds that service. And sometimes when He wants to make a point about what really matters, He does something so dramatic that the whole world has to stop and pay attention. He brings someone back from death just to prove that their life of quiet faithfulness was worth continuing. If Dorcas's story has touched your heart today, I want you to do 3 things. First, leave a comment below and tell me what part of Dorcas's story resonated with you most. Was it when the widows showed Peter the garment she'd made? Was it when Peter called her name and she opened her eyes? Or was it realizing that your quiet faithfulness is seen by heaven even when no one else notices? Share your thoughts. I read every single comment, and I'll be leaving hearts because I want to hear how this story spoke to you. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Every week, we bring you forgotten biblical characters with life-changing lessons. Real stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things through simple obedience. Messages that prove God values faithfulness over fame, character over credentials, and love over loud platforms. Stories that don't just inform you, but transform how you see your own purpose. Third, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who serves quietly and wonders if it matters, someone who feels invisible in their ministry, someone who needs to know that heaven sees them, values them, and is recording every act of love they perform in Jesus' name. Because this isn't just a story from 2,000 years ago. This is a message for right now, for you. For everyone who has ever felt like their service doesn't count because it doesn't attract attention. Dorcas started as a seamstress in Joppa. She became the only woman in the New Testament raised from the dead by the apostles. She began with needle and thread. She ended with a testimony that spans millennia. The difference wasn't talent. It wasn't education. It wasn't position or platform. The difference was faithfulness. Day after day, stitch after stitch, widow after widow, she served with wholehearted devotion. That's the difference between religious activity and kingdom impact. Religious activity asks, who's watching? Kingdom impact asks, am I being faithful? Religious activity seeks recognition. Kingdom impact seeks obedience. Religious activity measures success by numbers and applause. Kingdom impact measures success by faithfulness to what God has called you to do, whether anyone notices or not. Dorcas chose kingdom impact, and heaven responded. Thousands of years have passed since Dorcas opened her eyes in that upper room, but the message remains unchanged. Your quiet service matters. Your hidden faithfulness is seen. Your acts of love, performed when no one is watching, are being recorded by the one who sees everything. And sometimes, when God wants to make a point about what He truly values, He does something so dramatic that no one can miss it. He brings someone back from death, not a ruler, not a religious leader, but a seamstress, because in God's kingdom the last are first, the humble are exalted, and the servants are greatest of all. Today God is asking you the same question He asked Dorcas every day of her life. Will you be faithful with what I've placed in your hands? Not someone else's calling, not someone else's gifts, not someone else's platform, your hands, your thread, your widows? And the answer is you. No matter how small your sphere of influence seems, no matter how invisible your service feels, no matter how many people overlook what you do, you can be faithful. You can serve wholeheartedly. You can love the people in front of you with everything you have. And heaven will notice, heaven will value, and heaven will honor that faithfulness in ways you cannot imagine. Don't compare your calling to anyone else's. Dorcas didn't try to be Peter. She didn't try to preach like Paul. She simply sewed clothes for widows because that's what God placed in her hands to do. And that simple obedience became a testimony powerful enough to bring an entire city to faith. What if your faithfulness in the small things is actually preparing the ground for something bigger than you can see? What if the quiet service you're doing right now, the service that feels insignificant, is actually the most important work you'll ever do? What if heaven is watching every single act of love and recording it in a book that will be opened one day when you stand before Jesus? Dorcas didn't live for earthly recognition. She lived for an audience of one. And when that one decided her work wasn't finished, he reversed death itself to make sure it continued. That's how much your faithfulness matters. That's how valuable your service is. That's how closely heaven is watching the things you do when you think no one is paying attention. The widows of Joppa knew Dorcas's value. They showed Peter the evidence. They wept with the grief of people who had lost someone irreplaceable, and God agreed with them. He brought her back, not because they deserved it, not because she deserved it, but because her work embodied something heaven refuses to let die: love in action. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, Jesus describes the final judgment. He separates people based not on how many sermons they preached or how famous they became, but on how they treated the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned. And he says something that should shake us to our core. Whatever you did for one of the least of these, you did for me. Dorcas clothed the naked. She served the least of these. And in doing so, she served Christ himself. When the widows held up those garments, they were showing Peter evidence of a life lived for Jesus. Every stitch was an act of worship. Every completed garment was a prayer made tangible. Every widow clothed was Christ himself receiving love through human hands. This is the heart of the gospel. God made flesh, love made visible, faith made practical. Dorcas understood this in a way that transcends theology and touches the very heart of what it means to follow Jesus. She didn't just believe in God. She demonstrated his love through the work of her hands. And when she died, heaven said, "Not yet. The world still needs this," and brought her back to continue the work. May the story of Dorcas remind you today that quiet faithfulness carries more weight in heaven than loud fame on earth. That the things you do when no one is watching matter more than the things you do on a stage. That God doesn't measure impact the way the world does. He measures it by love, by obedience, by the faithfulness of a servant who never seeks glory, but simply serves because serving is what love does. You are seen, you are valued, you are making a difference that you won't fully understand until you stand before Jesus, and he shows you the ripple effects of every act of kindness, every moment of service, every sacrifice you made when no one else knew. Dorcas's resurrection wasn't just for her, it was for you. It was God saying through the centuries, "I see you. What you're doing matters. Don't stop. Keep sowing, keep serving, keep loving, because I'm not finished with you yet." And when your work on earth is complete, you'll hear the words every faithful servant longs to hear. "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord." May you find the courage to be faithful in the small things. May you discover that obscurity is not the same as insignificance. And may you live each day knowing that heaven is recording every stitch. God bless you deeply. Until the next story.